Hi, welcome to One Eye on the Page. I am Scott. I am going to be talking about the Bible. Let's get started. I've said before in videos that I try to read the Bible every couple of years or so. I pointed out last year I tried to do it using an app, and I fell behind in it. So I ended up DNFing the Bible, and I started again this year on the 1st of January. I do not call myself particularly religious. I grew up Catholic. I would probably call myself agnostic, if anything. But I do have an enjoyment of reading a religious literature in addition to the Bible, which I've read probably 6 to 7 times, particularly in the last 10, 12 years or so. I've also read the Book of Mormon. I have read the Quran. I've tried to read some Talmudic literature. If you don't know, you probably would if you have listened to some of the podcasts I do about PG Woodhouse with my daughter Robin. My daughter Robin is Jewish. She converted about 7 or 8 years ago. So although I am not Jewish, it plays kind of a peripheral part in my life, especially around Christmas because Robin comes here every Christmas, and I make sure everything that she eats is kosher. If Hanukkah is happening around the same time, we light the menorah. I light the menorah regardless if Robin is around, although I don't offer up prayers for it because it doesn't seem right for me to do that. So we've kind of done the whole Christmaka thing. Uh, I have also tried to read other books about religion to varying degrees of success. I've read many books on Buddhism. I've attempted reading Hinduism. I some of that stuff, and I forget the name of the books that Hinduism has, but they seem a little bit, but it seems a little too poetical for my sense. I have read about Sikhism. I haven't really read too much in the literature, although I have tried. But I took a literature class at this point in time. I think it was 14 years ago, just comparative religions, and I really developed an enjoyment, kind of a looking up to a character in the Sikhism religion, Guru Amar Das. There were 10, I believe, gurus, with the last one actually being the book itself. And Amar Das was my favorite. But again, try to read the Bible every couple of years or so. Started this year. I started it with the app. I started it with the app, and then I also was listening to the books on YouTube, but also I downloaded on Audible this version of the Bible. I already had a version of the Bible read by Johnny Cash, but that didn't work for me. I don't know that this one necessarily worked for me because, in addition to many celebrity readers in it who worked to a varying degrees of success, it also had sound effects, which, when there were battles, was quite interesting. I read that, and then when I was looking up the versions that were more close to the original writings. They're not going to be extremely close because those were written in Hebrew and Aramaic in the New Testament. written in Greek, I believe. But I saw not wholehearted consensus, but a general consensus that the NSRV version was one of the more uh, comparable ones as far as the translation goes. In addition to the Old Testament and New Testament, uh, it has some books in it that are Deuteronomical. Deuteronomical. I believe that's as close as I'm going to get to actually saying it. So, has books including the Book of Judith, uh, the Greek Book of Easter, which basically has some additional chapters in it. Wisdom of Solomon, Book of Sirach, Book of Barak, Letter of Jeremiah, Azariah and the Three Jews, Susanna, Bell and the Dragon, which not quite what I was looking for, but it was interesting. Maccabees, four books of Maccabees, two books at Esdras, Extra Psalm, and Prayer of Messiah. So I also had that, and because I had that and it had extra books in there, I also read. I didn't. I supplemented with an Audible of 54 books of Apocrypha, which has a whole bunch of books, which I will get into later. I am reading 100 book Apocrypha, which is somewhere around 3,000 plus pages. But in those books, it also has those Deuteronomical books that I talked about here, uh, Tobit, Judith, Maccabees, etc. So I listened to those on Audible also. And as I mentioned, I'm reading the 100 book Apocrypha. I went ahead and bought that on Kindle and I read some of that in there. So, uh, two books of Apocrypha that I used, uh, the NSRV book, the app, the All Star Audible book. But yeah, I use 5 versions of uh, biblical text and non biblical text to read the Bible. And I read the Bible. I fell behind last year, but particularly because of using audiobook this year, I got ahead. And also, when I was doing the app, it would have like sometimes two, sometimes three, sometimes up to 5 or 6 parts of the Old Testament, going chronologically from Genesis to the last book in it, which I can't remember. Malachi is the last book in the Old Testament. Uh, it it would have one reading from the New Testament, and what I ended up doing was I got through the New Testament because I would read a little bit extra here and there by the end of January, and I also in January I read all the parables and uh, the Psalms and the like the Song of Solomon, all that. So I got all through that and then finished up this month with all like the Book of Tobit, Judith, etc. So I do read a lot of religious texts, probably more than the general layman, much less than scholars. I do not consider myself a scholar. I I I can't read Hebrew or an Aramaic, and if of course if I would to think of myself as a biblical scholar, I feel like I should be able to at least understand some Hebrew, probably not Aramaic because I think that's pretty much a lost language. I may be wrong, and in Greek. which I can't understand any of those languages. Uh, but I do have an appreciation for the Bible as literature. So it's been an adventure. I don't think that it's changed my view of religion. It has changed my view of history. In addition to reading these, I've done some. I've done my own research. Often a bad thing, but I've done some additional research on what some of these books, passages, verses mean and what they may have meant, because again, with the different languages that were used writing it in the different words, and not to get deep into controversial topics, but of course, like at the time that like Leviticus was written, there wasn't a word that meant homosexual. So it's interesting doing some research in that, and even scholars don't necessarily agree on what those particular passages that apparently talk about homosexuality actually mean. Some people have suggested it means like older men getting with younger men. Some have put that, uh, especially when looking at different like rabbinic literature written during the time frame, that it may mean that it's not so much the same sex thing, but it's a man putting in a submissive position that is the wrong thing. Which, if you go through the Bible and you look how women are talked about in the Bible, I don't think even the most staunch Christian could go that, yeah, the Bible is all about equality. It's not. There are certain passages in there, the book of Ruth, uh, that go to a woman's point of view, even though it doesn't pass the Bechdel test. Uh, but generally, the woman only plays certain roles. Uh, Property, wife, which is still property, harlot. And of course, that does change a touch when you get to the New Testament, but even when you get to the New Testament, Paul, oh, Paul. Um, Paul didn't like sex. I'm going to tell you right now. Paul had certain feelings about women, which sometimes contradicted what other things Paul had to say about women. And that's the thing about the Bible, is that you have to be able to take the contradictions, because there are contradictions. There's, however you feel about the Bible, whether you believe it was a word directly from God or it was a word from God passed on to human authors, or whether it's a mythology, uh, there are different authors, and different authors sometimes contradict each other. Chapter 1 of Genesis and chapter 2 of Genesis have two different stories about when man was created. Uh, and I think that if you're religious, you can still take the word of God and believe it, understanding that God speaks through man, and man is not perfect. Uh, it, that's not necessarily how I take it, but I've always been of the belief that even though I'm not a religious person, if a religion helps a person, I'm all for that religion. I just don't like religion when it causes people to harm others. I enjoyed much of the New Testament. Again, I'm not the hugest fan of Paul, and I apologize if I offend anybody who's religious who's watching this. But when I think of Paul, I goes like, "Oh, that dude is asexual, asexual, aromantic." Which it's like, yeah, laying a sexual identity on a saint. But yeah, the man did not like sex, did not like other people having sex. Something that I don't know before when I read the book if I just got to that and like I'm near the end and it's like also like I said I did more follow up reading and looking at things with this reading than I had before. So, I didn't really understand before when I read the Bible. It's like, oh, not only is Paul basically against sex outside of marriage, he's not really fond of sex inside marriage too. It's like if you can't resist, then get married so that when you do fornicate, it's not a sin, but really remain celibate as much as you can. And it's like, yeah, they don't really push that much in the religions that I've seen. They haven't really. They preach don't have sex outside of marriage, but they kind of don't be like, yo, and don't really have it inside marriage unless you really, really can't stop. Uh, the Old Testament. I mean, the Old Testament, like I said, repetitive. Also, nobody needs to know this much about qubits. I in it was really interesting listening to a lot of this, especially like the genealogy chapters where mm, this person begat this person who begat this person who begat this person, and I can't remember what books it was in, but it's like this person was uh, born the son of blah blah, lived ruled 72 years and did evil in the eyes of the Lord or did good in the eyes of the Lord kind of thing. And it's like just every person in genealogy. And uh, I'll be honest, if you're looking at that uh, religiously, I guess it matters to you. But if you're looking at it kind of like the way I am doing, I'm looking as literature, as a story, as something, and it's just kind of like, okay, a lot of people were born, did good, did bad. I almost missed the sound effects of people hitting people with the edge of their sword that they had in the audiobook. But again, I enjoyed it because I was reading the Bible and doing research on it that I decided to delve a little bit deeper, reading the Apocrypha, which again, I read those books are included in the NSRV, but I am also reading more now. I just finished uh, the books. It's like the books of the 12 patriarchs or something like that. But basically, the 12 sons of Jacob, including Joseph, who was sold by his brothers into slavery in Egypt. Uh, so those 12 sons, and now I'm starting on the Book of Jubilees, which is apparently kind of like at least uh, somewhat of a retelling of Genesis, but with more information. Haven't really gotten into it. I just started it like an hour before I talked about this. I finished my year-long Bible read in less than 3 months. It was scheduled for 314 days in the plan that I used, and I finished it, I think, on March 11th or 12th, I think. Uh, but it's really easy to do when you one able to do it in audiobook because I probably I think I had about 56 hours that I listened to of the Bible. So a lot of my reading was listening, which was very helpful. So I feel a little strange about giving this a rating. I for literary content, I'd probably give it a 4. Like I said, there are some parts of it that quite simply dragged, and if I didn't listen to them, I well, if I didn't listen to them, there's no way I would have finished the Bible in March. Uh, I mean, I think if you take out the audiobook, I'm looking it, probably not till mid-year at the very least, if not possibly just 314 days. So yeah, I'll give it a 4 star. There's a lot that's good in it. I do think there's a lot of it that has great literary content in it. And there's a lot that's kind of like, I don't know why it's just in here. But again, not a biblical scholar. I have found my favorite passage. It's a very simple one, I think. It's Romans 12:21. Do not become overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Or at least in the version I read, that it there are so many versions uh, of the Bible with different language choices, and some of them just basing on like you can Google a biblical chapter verse and see like the different versions. Some of them are really bad. I have to say some of the I guess modern English kind of uses are really bad in my view. But this one was pretty good. The NSRV. Uh, I'm not. I don't think I read every version in the NSRV, but I tried to as much as possible. So that was the Bible. Please like and subscribe, leave a comment, and I'll talk to you next time.